Business in general favors that, except, let's face it, we do see Robert Kennedy so closely aligned with Trump and likely to emerge as a major influence on healthcare policy, medical policy. And so what the market's already starting to do is reduce the valuations of companies that would be under attack by that approach, and raising the prices of those that will benefit. So, for example, Elon Musk's stocks are all up, whereas we're going to probably see pharma and big food down. So the market's doing what it always does, which is discounting the outcome. Look, the really big issue in this election is that I think the establishment has not understood the huge impact of independent voters. America is no longer a country where everybody is either on the left or on the right. More than half the voters, under most circumstances, will say, I'm not either one anymore. And that is what has made it so hard to judge the outcome. So, for example, like in the state of Georgia, it turns out that the number of independent voters is much higher than was expected, and they lean Trump much more than expected. So I think this is going to be a continuing theme of this race is, wait a minute, I thought I understood the left and the right, but it's this new thing called the independent, and people don't understand it very well yet.
Okay, Pippa Malmgren, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's just go and take a look at some voting in Georgia. Polls in Georgia were supposed to have closed some time ago, but we've had these bomb threats down there. The polls have been open much longer than people expected. Looks from those pictures as if they are still open. We're just waiting for the next slew of polls to close in places like Wisconsin. The story of the night really so far is that the data out of Georgia does not look particularly attractive for Kamala Harris. Certainly looking at our underlying data, nor does some of the national picture. It doesn't look as if she's doing nearly as well in key groups like African Americans and amongst Latino voters when compared with Joe Biden, and she really needed to hold her own in those and perhaps do better with college-educated women. I think that was the big hope for Kamala Harris. Look, it's terribly early days, but it doesn't look massively positive for her campaign at this point. It may be that the northern battleground states, and we're just about to have the polls close in Wisconsin, it may be that they do perform very differently from Georgia. We'll just have to see. But we're now going to go to CNN as those polls close and see what they make of it.
John King, voting is about to end in 15 states, the second biggest wave of results this evening. 163 electoral votes will be up for grabs, and we're watching several crucial battlegrounds. CNN's going to bring you this projection right now. CNN projects that Texas will go to Donald Trump. The state of Texas, as expected, to Donald Trump with its big bucket of 40 electoral votes. CNN also projects that North Dakota will go to Donald Trump. As expected, North Dakota with its 3 electoral votes. 2 more for Trump now. CNN projects that South Dakota will go to Donald Trump. South Dakota, as expected, with its 3 electoral votes to Donald Trump. And CNN projects that Wyoming will go to Donald Trump. Wyoming with its 3 electoral votes. CNN is not making any projections in the following states that just closed their polls. Arizona, that's a big battleground. Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, battleground Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, and battleground Wisconsin. Let's look at the electoral map now. Donald Trump has 154 electoral votes. Kamala Harris has 27 electoral votes. 207.
Well, there we have it. I think what you're seeing in the course of the night is that it's close. We thought it was going to be close. It is close, and that's why so few races have been called early. No news station wants to put itself out there until they're pretty sure of the result. You only go for a result once you're really confident that it can't be unwound, that the counties, for example, that haven't declared aren't going to come up with something so surprising that's going to upset the apple cart. Clearly, it's close, which is why we're not getting projections yet. Jessica, though, you do have some news.
So there is a call in North Carolina. It is not for president, I want to underscore, but I think even our viewers over there in the UK have been following the North Carolina governor's race there, where
whether they like it or not, they have.
Yes, where the Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson was embroiled in multiple scandals, including allegedly posting on a pornography website about being a black Nazi and different things. So the Democrat there, the Attorney General Josh Stein, has been called by the Associated Press as the winner there. He's currently leading by about 13 points, even as Trump is up by about 4 points in the state. So we don't, we don't see a lot of ticket splitting in races, but where we do still see it is in governor's races. We saw Senate races typically break the same way that presidential results do. We've seen that in 2016 and in 2020. But this governor's race, certainly, there was even a concern by some Republicans that Robinson, with all his scandals and controversy, would sort of drag down Trump. We haven't seen that. So that's good news for the Trump campaign there, that we aren't seeing any of that. But again, this is a victory for Democrats in that they held that seat. And again, Republicans basically pulled out of the state after that scandal as well.
Do you see any read over at all between Mark Robinson, not making it and the presidential race, or do you just think people will have thought about these things entirely differently?
I think people view it entirely differently. Again, when people are voting for Senate, they're voting for which party they want to control Congress. When they're voting for governor, you're voting more for the person. And Mark Robinson became just so polarizing there. And so it's not surprising. And in the past 2 presidential election cycles, even as Trump has won the state, the Democrat there, Roy Cooper, won both times. So North Carolina is used to splitting his tickets, but by a much bigger margin. And that's because of that scandal with Mark Robinson. He was just you even saw Trump trying to distance and Vance trying to distance themselves from him to an extent.
We've talked a lot about the presidential race. You've mentioned this North Carolina governor's race. What about the Senate and the House? Any indication at all about who's going to end up with control of the House or the Senate?
Yeah, so we're watching in Pennsylvania very closely. That we're still waiting for results there. Ohio, we're still seeing very close results there. That's a state that's going to go for Trump, but I'm still waiting on some of the big population centers with Sherrod Brown there. Can he outrun Trump, the Democrat there? Where the House is, we have seen one flip in the Senate, and this is one that we expected, the open West Virginia Senate seat there with Joe Manchin, the Democrat turned independent, retiring. The governor there, Jim Justice, also used to be a Democrat, became a Republican. He's easily flipped that. We expected that. So that means the Senate battleground is at 50-50. Republicans now only have to pick up 1 seat in order to win the Senate, and that most likely seat is not going to come for a couple of hours until polls close in Montana.
And one of the big lines of messaging coming out of Republicans this year is, we need control of the U.S. Senate. We need it because it's a backstop to crazy leftists doing all kinds of things that you don't want to happen. That's been the message, and it's been very effective, actually, not just with Republican voters, but also with fundraisers. Another thing that the Republican Party has done this year, they've gotten some really good, strong Senate candidates. There's been a lot of talk about some really poor Republican candidates in recent years who haven't been properly vetted, who are a little wacky. North Carolina being a perfect example of someone who should have been better vetted. But we have some good ones this year. Montana, Tim Sheehy,
I was going to say,
former Navy
you spend
SEAL.
a lot of your time in Montana.
I do. And he's a very strong candidate. In fact, if he wins, I think he could potentially go on to be presidential potential someday.
Wow.
He's that good. He is that good. No, truly, he's that good. He's one to watch.
Purple Heart recipient.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Purple Heart recipient.
And many other things as well. And then if you look at Pennsylvania, where you have Dave McCormick. Dave was also an Army officer, went to West Point. Dave McCormick made a ton of money from a hedge fund years ago, and he's trying to serve his country. He didn't win last time around. In fact, he didn't have Trump support last time around. Dr. Oz, who is an American kind of silly doctor here, celebrity doctor, had Trump's support, but now Dave McCormick this time, another stellar candidate. So I think Republicans will do well in the Senate.
Okay, so do Republicans end up with the White House, the House, and the Senate by the end of this evening? We will see. Let's go back to Dan, who is at the Trump watch party. How are they feeling, Dan?
Well, there's continuing sort of loud buzz and cheers going up each time a result is called on Fox News behind me. I mean, they were just saying that in Miami-Dade, which is a heavily Latino area of Florida, Donald Trump is up 11%. That seems to be a pretty extraordinary number if that holds. Obviously, not all the votes are counted yet, but I think quite a lot of them are, and that would suggest this theme that you've been discussing of Latino men looking like they are coming out and voting for Donald Trump in significant numbers, which is, after all, pretty extraordinary given the jokes about Puerto Rico from Tony Hinchcliffe at that rally that we were at in Madison Square Garden in New York in the final stages of this campaign. And yet it seems like, you know, there are still a significant number of Latino men who are willing to come out and vote for Donald Trump. Now, you know, the question is why. Obviously, is that because of the economy, or what particular message, or is it a reaction to Kamala Harris's message or offer? But it seems like some pretty significant results beginning to trickle in. We're still a long way from getting any kind of definitive idea of which way this election is going, though. But it looks like it is going to be very close as all the polls may have suggested all along.
Pollsters being right, maybe the biggest development of the night. Dan, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Scotty Nell Hughes, who is a Republican, a commentator, and I think it's fair to say, enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump. How are you feeling at this point? So far, the data looks good for you?
The data looks good, but I first have to give a great shout out to my friend Heather. I've not seen her in a few years. It's amazing. I've loved watching your panel and discussion this evening. I know she's excited just because I know how much she loves elections like I do. But yes, tonight is actually very interesting because on one hand, I thought that it was going to be kind of a breeze looking at some of the data going into it. I've been following Polymarket, which, you know, I always say you can always look at what the odds are in Vegas. They usually do better than the pollsters. And all day long, Polymarket has had Trump up the whole day. Then it was about midday that started to even out a little bit more. But tonight, as the votes are starting to be counted, Polymarket actually has Trump at a 71.1% lead over Kamala's 29.3%. So you know, if people are willing to put their money where their vote is and put and risk it, that's usually a pretty accurate of where the country's going. Personally, right now, that's why I'm just looking at my phone. Virginia is my biggest surprise. I'll be honest with you. I thought Virginia was going to go all blue, obviously, because you have a lot of government workers that live in Virginia, that travel in to do their work, but they vote in Virginia. The fact that Trump still has a chance in Virginia, I think, is a surprise to so many, including myself, that just kind of speaks whether if those government workers should have been given the day off to stay home and maybe go vote in their district, or maybe they're actually asking for a change of the administrations as well.
Do you think it's plausible? I mean, so far, what data we have seems to relate to the Sun Belt. Do you think it's plausible that the Rust Belt just behaves completely differently?
I'm going back and forth to it. You know, Trump felt very secure, or as secure as you could be going into Pennsylvania today. Obviously, the betting markets are saying that Trump is going to take Pennsylvania. But if Trump takes Virginia, if Trump takes North Carolina, Georgia, and then, maybe he doesn't, I don't think even at that point really needs Pennsylvania at that stage. But if Trump is able to take Pennsylvania as well, I think this is also going to not only bring up some serious excitement about what's going to happen with the Trump agenda in the next 4 years, but it's also going to be sort of a vindication to Trump that something wasn't right in 2020 if he's got these overwhelming states that did not go for him so well 4 years ago. What has changed and allowed him to be able to go into power this time?
Well, one plausible scenario would be that if he wins tonight, it might be sensible to acknowledge that he lost last time. I mean, after all, what would be the logic in winning when Joe Biden is in the White House and controlling all the machinery of government when he lost when he wasn't? I wouldn't quite get the logic of that. Surely if he wins tonight, the logic is he probably lost last time.
Well, we hope he doesn't continue that conversation, but you have to go, how does the party that had the most votes, popular votes ever in history lose just 4 years later? And you have to wonder, from the Democrats' perspective, were they really better off switching off candidate Joe Biden just 100 days out to Kamala Harris? Could they potentially have been able to salvage even better if they would have stuck with who they originally had the last 3 years? Those kind of questions the Democrats are going to have to answer. But first, we have to get through tonight. Very exciting. I have to think, if Florida can count their votes in 2 hours, why can't every other state? In fact, any other state that can't do it that efficiently, I think the people need to look at their state government and go, why are you so inefficient, and why are you wasting taxpayer dollars and time and not able to get your votes counted. If a diverse state like Florida can do it, then every other state in the U.S. should be able to as well.
You may find people all over America and perhaps back home in the UK wondering the same question. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Let's go back to Julie in California with some pretty crucial, perhaps tonight, young voters.
Hello again from San Francisco and Manny's watch party, getting livelier by the minute, and I'm joined now by that crucial core of voters, young voters. Anybody following Kamala Harris's campaign will have spotted that she put a whole lot of emphasis on getting first-time and young voters out, and we've got a few here. I'm going to take a seat here and see if I can get to speak to Patrick. First of all, you're a first-time voter and you've been quite torn. You quite like some of Trump's policies on the economy. Just talk me through how you've decided your vote.
Yeah, I was undecided for a few months, definitely earlier in the year, but I think the biggest issue for me was abortion access. I have a lot of women in my life who deeply care about that, and that was the deciding issue for me the last couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, tell us what your thinking's been. You're a history and cinema double major student at San Fran State University.
Yeah, I mean, Kamala Harris has been a key part of an administration that has continued to give billions and billions of dollars to Israel as it continues to destroy Gaza even after, tens of thousands of deaths.
So this is, and how much have you found that's been an issue amongst young voters on your campus?
Yeah, on our campus, it's a big issue. We have a Palestinian community on our campus that doesn't want to see their families back in Gaza and in the West Bank continue to be persecuted, be killed by a government that receives American money, American tax money, and our tuition money.
So may I ask where you put your vote in the end?
Yeah, I mean, I voted third party because I don't live in a swing state. I live in a blue state that will go to Harris. And I think it's important that the Democratic Party understands that there are people that would usually give their vote to them that are upset with them, that they've continued to support Israel.
Fascinating, thank you. Sean, you're a fourth-year student at San Fran State University studying journalism. Neither felt like a very good option to you.
Yes, I really wasn't comfortable with, obviously, Donald Trump. He is a known liar, narcissist, rapist. He's been convicted of multiple felonies. And yet on the other side, like Brian was mentioning, you have Kamala Harris, who, by all means, I have a greater appreciation for in terms of what she's done for democracy and in terms of what she wants to do for women and for other minority groups. But there's also that compelling interest, ultimately, of there are people dying in Gaza, and there are people dying, all over that area of land in Palestine, in Gaza, that this administration that she is a part of with Biden has continued to ignore and continue to just let this happen, ultimately.
So where did you go with your vote in the end?
Ultimately,
civil and federal suits against Donald Trump is what we should understand.
Ultimately, I did end up voting for Kamala Harris, but ultimately, it's not a vote I'm completely comfortable with, but I know that in the end, I am more likely to change Kamala Harris's mind in terms as a voter compared to changing Donald Trump's mind.
Yeah, talk us through your voting thinking.
Yeah, so I supported Kamala Harris because, first of all, I support her intersectional nature of her political representation, and second of all, which is most important for me, reproductive freedom. And she has one of her central promises as to restore reproductive freedom. And it's really important because it's the first presidential election after Roe v. Wade, which imposed a nationwide ban on abortion. So it's not just a matter of abortion rights, but also in local, federal, and state level. It's going to be a rollback on women's rights issues, such as menstrual equity and contraceptive access and bans on no-fault divorce. So because Kamala Harris supports a lot of women's rights and women's health issues, that's why I supported her.
Okay, thank you for that. And Ben Bartlett, you're a first-time voter. You're at Berkeley. Yes. Take us through your thinking.
So I'm an environmental biology major, so something that is really important to me is having robust environmental policies. Specifically, I've seen Kamala Harris, I got invited to a climate conference to see her viewpoints on the Inflation Reduction Act, and having a candidate that believes in climate change is so important. And it's like, but however, I do want to hold her accountable for having more nuanced climate policies, like banning fracking, which is like hydraulic fracking is a very important issue to me because it's such a short-term,
yeah, well, she's been criticised for flip-flopping on it. It's really interesting listening to all of you.
2019,
yeah. I mean, it's really interesting listening to all of you that there's not a great slam dunk here in the way that people necessarily feel about her. And Anais Shergill, you're a political science student, and that's exactly where you've been caught. You felt you couldn't vote for either the main candidates.
Yeah, well, I am a political science as well as a sociology student, and I have a minor I'm pursuing a minor in law. And so this type of stuff is very important to me. I did end up voting third party for De La Cruz Garcia.
And who's that in California?
Claudia De La Cruz and Garcia. I believe on the ballot it was under the Peace and Freedom Party, but they're also going under the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So one thing I will mention, which I believe was already mentioned before, is that we live in a blue state, and so basically our vote is not going to have a huge deciding factor in this election. And I think that it's really important to recognize that third parties actually do have a lot of power in, holding our candidates accountable, because the two-party system, as we see it right now, is not a sustainable system. And I'm sure, as you've seen across the board, people are not happy with either of the candidates, Republican or Democrat. You look at the cost of living in comparison to the stagnant wages, or wages that have remained stagnant, which are causing incredibly horrible issues in the U.S., just here in the U.S., like homelessness. Kamala Harris was the district attorney for San Francisco, and she put around 2,000 people in jail for marijuana-related crimes, things such as that. And so I think that voting third party is definitely very important, especially during a time right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating to hear all of your insights here, when people might have assumed in such a blue state, as you were saying, Anais, that it might have been more straightforward for Kamala Harris. That ain't necessarily the story that we're hearing from all of you tonight. So we really appreciate you coming to talk to all of us. Thank you very much, and I'll see if I can manage to get off my old knees. And we'll be back here at the party a bit later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Anushka to get some details of how the race is shaping up in some of the key states.
Thank you, Tom. I want to give you an update on the latest events around the United States and different media platforms. Some are making predictions. In fact, the New York Times is forecasting that Trump is going to make it into the White House with 276 college votes. They've predicted Harris to pick up 262 votes. I should say they've not always been right at this point. And it's still very tight. Votes are still coming in, of course, in the swing state of North Carolina. Harris was actually ahead earlier in the counting, but is currently sitting on 47% of the votes. And Trump is on 51%. 40% of them have been counted so far. Slightly more positive signs for Harris coming from perhaps the key swing state, the way it's shaping up, Pennsylvania. She has 60% of the vote compared to Trump on 38%, although only 18% of the vote has come in. And we have seen before Pennsylvania tipping more to Democrats early on. And I should say already in the time we've been watching this, it has shifted slightly towards Trump. Well, Trump has already been raising the prospect of voter fraud in the state. He posted on Truth Social earlier tonight saying there is a lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia law enforcement coming. Now, Philadelphia is the biggest city in the state of Pennsylvania, which increasingly looks like it could decide this election. However, Philadelphia authorities have since insisted there is no factual basis whatsoever to support Trump's claims.
Anushka, what do you make of everything you've seen so far? I mean, obviously, it's still relatively early days. You've got the New York Times making that prediction. We don't, as we've said, they've got it wrong before. but it doesn't look massively promising to Harris from where we are unless she comes home pretty strong in Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania, and she might, but so far and what we've seen in the other swing states doesn't encourage you to think that it's looking brilliant for her. Fair or not fair?
Totally fair. I mean, it is worth just saying, Tom, obviously, we haven't got as many of the likely Democrat states called yet, but these are the results on the board. And already Donald Trump, not with any surprises here, but at 154, Kamala Harris on 30. But obviously, we will get these other results as they come. And as we've said so many times, the majority of them are going to go the way that we expect them to. It is going to come down to these. But the thing that we were talking about before we came into any of this was that there were underlying trends that she needed to be winning, you know, this election. If I can just bring it back to that kind of prediction board where we fill in all the likely things, and just let's bring it back once again, as I did earlier, to where Joe Biden was in 2020. Remember that he won 6 out of 7 of these swing states. So we turned them all blue apart from North Carolina, which we would turn red. You know, this was a big win in terms of the Electoral College votes, even though it came down to just 43,000 votes. And I've said it earlier tonight, she doesn't need to hold on to all of them in order to be able to win. But the big kind of stories that we were looking for, and we were able to already show you some of them, was would she be able to drive ahead with women voters, for example? And abortion was seen as if it would be a huge motivating factor for a lot of women. And the reality is that the early data we're seeing does not show that shift that we were expecting among women, although in some states it's perhaps more there than it is in others. For example, in Pennsylvania, non-college educated white women, it does look like perhaps she has made some gains with them, which we're not seeing in states like Georgia and North Carolina at the moment. And on the other hand, the other big narrative coming into this was, how was Donald Trump doing with minority voters? Was it possible that he could squeeze that vote compared to where it was with Biden, even when he was up against a minority candidate, you know, someone who's going to be the first black female president of the United States? And again, the underlying data doesn't look good. But I think you've been making this point, and to be honest, it is possibly something that we are seeing, or seeing a suggestion of in the data, that perhaps the Sun Belt could behave differently to the Rust Belt. One thing I just want to point out, I showed you the data earlier on Latino voters, which on a national basis is really not looking very good for Kamala Harris. Not only has the gap with all Latino voters, you know, squeezed, but it looks like on that national survey data that Latino men are actually voting more for Donald Trump than they are for Kamala Harris. Well, we haven't yet talked about Arizona, but Arizona is a big and important state. If we bring it back up on the map just quickly, as quickly as we can, there you go. So yeah, look, Arizona here in the West, you know, this is, as you've been talking about, you know, this is a state which has 1/3 of voters, the Latino population. And, you know, there was a sense, could that have helped Kamala Harris? Well, if that survey data is to be believed, that's going to make it very difficult in a state with 11 electoral votes.
I just want to try and crystallise and recap on kind of where we are. There was this big debate about whether the polls were accurate or not accurate, and there was a lot of, you know, they've been off by 4 points the last 2 presidential election cycles, and there was the feeling, therefore, they might be off either way by 4 points or more this time. First of all, it doesn't look like they were off, and that it is going to be very tight, and therefore they're correct about that. They also said that Trump was doing much better and she was struggling amongst the Latino population and Latino men in particular. Also, to some extent, amongst black voters, and that also looks like it's true. But then we spent quite a bit of the last day or so talking about that Iowa poll and whether it showed something that pollsters might have missed, which is women in certainly some states coming out much more strongly motivated by the issue of abortion than we thought. So far, the first part of everything I just said there looks like it's being true. But if I interpret you correctly, you're saying the second part, the kind of whole Iowa question, that doesn't necessarily look like it's true.
No, I think one thing that people wondered if it might happen would be, would white working class women or white women just generally vote in larger numbers for Kamala Harris than they have done previously for Democrat candidates. You know, if you actually track the votes of white women over the past few presidential elections, it is totally fascinating. We had a situation where they've been ahead for the Republicans for some time, and they've increased, and they increased massively towards the Republicans in 2012, and then were above, you know, they voted more for Donald Trump than they did for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and again for Joe Biden. We wondered, Tom, didn't we, could it look different this time with white women across the country? And at the moment, that national data is suggesting that no, it doesn't look very different, that she hasn't actually increased that overall vote. However, I can show you some of the breakdowns in Pennsylvania because, you know, I've said this a few times now. She doesn't have to win all the swing states that Joe Biden did. She may only have to win the 3 Rust Belt ones. It could just come down to that if it's looking bad in somewhere like Georgia. And so there is a particular group in Pennsylvania where it does look like the Republican vote has dropped back somewhat. And I think this could be quite important. This is, you know, white, non-college educated women, a group who have voted very heavily for Donald Trump in the past. And you can see that while he is still ahead with this group, it looks like possibly she's made some small gains, always very cautious with a small change like that, but a slightly more significant drop for the Republicans. And look, like I said again before, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania. So if Pennsylvania is looking very similar, then that will give, you know, the Democrats some hope. And perhaps what you were suggesting earlier is possible, that there is a different trend taking place in the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt.
OK, Anushka, thank you very much. Jessica, can I come to you? You've got some news.
Yes, we do see one person calling North Carolina for Trump, Decision Desk HQ. We don't I don't believe we have an AP call on that yet. But again, just reiterating that a lot of that state is trending toward Trump. Of course, this is the swing state that has gone for Trump in 2016 and in 2020. This was always going to be a little more of a lift. You know, again, Harris's clearest path still remains through the blue wall there. You know, with the New York Times right now, if I pull up and all the caveats that Anushka has also said about sort of, I feel like people from Democrats from 2016 have PTSD with the New York Times needle and different things because it was projecting Hillary Clinton early on and different things, but they are now giving just a very slight edge to Trump in Pennsylvania, Michigan very early. I still want to say that. You know, as I'm looking at some of the exit poll data from Michigan, some of the numbers with women, Harris doing a little less than Biden was, doing a little worse with white college women, and doing a little bit better with white. Trump's doing better with white non-college women. So we are seeing some gains there now. Michigan was, you know, that was a state by 154,000 votes versus Wisconsin was just 20,000 votes. You know, Wisconsin, the numbers are looking a little bit about the same. Harris actually doing slightly better with white college men there. Again, we're still waiting on sort of the main results from the big population centers to tell us what's going on there.
I was going to ask you, Adam, how disappointed do you think Wilmington, the sort of Harris team, be with the loss of North Carolina? It's a lift, as Jessica said, but they had invested quite a lot of resources and candidate time in North Carolina.
Invested candidate time and resources there. I think the campaign knows that if they win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Nebraska too, which we'll see how that goes, that we don't need to win North Carolina. Obviously, like, we'd love to have it. We'd love to win. I think it's great that we won the governor's race, that Josh Stein will be the next governor of North Carolina. I think that, you know, we'll see how the final vote shakes out there. Roughly, it was about 1%, I think, you know, 4 years ago. So we'll see how close it actually ends up being. I'm watching also some of the votes still outstanding in Georgia, DeKalb County in particular. That big Democratic numbers, raw vote that comes into that county, that, you know, could sway the final result there. So it's very early to tell. I think Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan may still be the bowl game.
It is the bowl game, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm reminded 4 years ago, I sat at an American television network doing this very thing for 2020. And at the beginning of the night, it was looking very favorable for Republicans. By the end of the night, it was not. And Donald Trump, of course, had lost. So, you know, this is going to be a very tight election. Certain information is looking like it favors the Republicans right now, but still too soon to say.
Surely the difference to last time is some of the underlying data seems to favour Trump more than it did last time. Is that?
Well, I think it does now. Chiefly because of the economy, Americans' concerns about immigration, cost of goods, all of that. Whereas before, he was the incumbent president during COVID. The incumbent president is always going to take a hit for whatever happens, whether he's responsible for it or not.
But what I mean, sorry, I'm possibly putting two and two together and getting 11, which is always a bit of a...
been a long day.
Yeah, you know, it's a privilege you have on election nights. But what I mean is, the polls did tell a certain story and we didn't know if it was true. And the underlying data, kind of the vote cast data, is sort of tending to say so far that the story the polls were telling us might have been true. And then hearing what we know out of North Carolina tends to suggest that therefore that might be in the right direction. That doesn't mean to say she won't win the Rust Belt and still win the election.
No, but I just want to keep going back to the reporting I've done in the field, which is that I was up in Erie, Pennsylvania, spending time there. I was talking to a woman who was having to sell her blood, her plasma, to try and pay for her groceries. And she was actually voting for Harris, but nevertheless, it tells you something that I don't think we should ever underestimate, which is the economic stress that people are under in this country. You know, they really struggle to pay for the basics. And that is a factor that I think plays into this election in a way that, you know, usurps everything else, at every level, in every battleground state.
OK, well, we've spent a lot of time talking about, over the last few days, about abortion, and abortion has been one of the top issues for voters in this election. And Kamala Harris and the Democrats have spent a lot of time trying to get their message across to voters. Let's have a listen to some of what they've been saying.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
He could take actions that effectively ban abortion nationwide, which would put all of us in danger.
In America, 1 in 3 women lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban.
He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade. 52 years of personal autonomy.
The majority of Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, and that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
As President, Kamala Harris will proudly sign a national law to restore reproductive freedom to every woman in every state in our country.
The fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do.
Well, Sejal is in Arizona, where abortion is on the ballot paper. Sejal, look, obviously that is one of the big issues for voters there, but do you think that will impact the presidential choice they make as well?
Look, Tom, I think that Kamala Harris has almost tied her presidential race and her real desire to win Arizona, almost tied it to the whole abortion rights issue. But the issue here in Arizona is that, of course, abortion rights is on the ballot. It is what women and men can vote on. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that will translate into votes for Kamala Harris. I mean, the Democrats have long hoped that it will bring their base out, that they will vote for abortion rights on the ballot and at the same time vote for Kamala Harris, but that is not necessarily the case. That is definitely going to happen here. It is easily the case that it could also happen that women and men vote for abortion rights here, but could also vote for Donald Trump. Donald Trump does really well here in Arizona on the issue of immigration, on the issue of border security, and on the issue of economy. And certainly he's been polling really well here. And although Kamala Harris's message about abortion rights is certainly loud and clear here in Arizona, I don't think that she can necessarily say that that would necessarily mean that women will come out and vote for her. The people that I have spoken to, and there have been a lot of people that I've spoken to, a lot of women that I've spoken to, yes, they tell me that they should have a right to decide over what happens to their body. It should not be up to the government. But equally, I have also heard from women who have also said to me that they are going to vote for Donald Trump because they believe in the right of life, they believe in the right of the child. So it's not as simple as Kamala Harris or as anybody else thinks it is here in Arizona. This race here is on a knife edge. It's not going to be a walk in the park for Kamala Harris. It's not going to be a walk in the park for Donald Trump either. And just to let you know that polls have now closed and both sides are going to be watching what happens here very, very carefully. 11 electoral college votes are up for grabs here.
Okay, Sejal, thank you very much. Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Gloria Allred. I think it's fair to say a legendary campaigner on the issue of abortion, worked on the original Roe v. Wade. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We did wonder if there was going to be a huge groundswell of women in various states in America coming out and sending a very clear message to politicians in Washington about reproductive freedoms. And it's very early days yet, but it doesn't particularly look like that has happened.
Well, it may happen in Pennsylvania, which is a battleground state, by the way, my home state, which is where she had a big rally last night in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we don't know. She really needs to win Pennsylvania. What's happening is we're seeing many states, red states, be tallied. But those are not the battleground states. The battleground states are the ones that are close. A lot of Democrats are voting, but often they are in the urban areas, the cities, and we're fighting for the suburbs as well. There's also been interesting results that have shown that there are a lot of older women in the suburbs who are definitely pro-choice, and many of whom might have gone to the Republicans except for the choice issue. So this is something that we do think is going to motivate many women. Women, of course, are in the majority. Women are more likely to go to the polls and vote. Women are more likely, when they vote, to vote Democratic. So we can't say yet. We don't see all of the, or maybe even most of the votes in the United States. California, where I'm located, but not right now, where I'm calling from New York. California and New York actually both have large electoral college votes, and they're not in yet. So we'll have to see what happens. We have to see what happens in Arizona, as was just mentioned by your correspondent. But this really is a life and death matter for women, particularly young women. Young women, we see, are very motivated. University women, college women, very motivated by the choice issue. And that's what this is, a choice issue. And women feeling the government should have no place and no right to make decisions about our bodies. And we know what happened when abortion was made a crime before Roe v. Wade. I had an illegal abortion. I almost died from it because it was not safe. It was not a crime for me to have one, but it was a crime for a doctor or a nurse, any healthcare provider, to provide it. And so many women died or were injured by illegal abortions because doctors then, as doctors now, in many states that ban abortion, are afraid to help women who literally are hemorrhaging to death, perhaps from a septic infection, and or even if they've had a miscarriage, they're afraid, the doctors are afraid to help them for fear that the doctors will be prosecuted for a crime. So this is women's lives, women's health being put in danger. And this is going to be a key issue. I don't say it's going to be the only issue, but it will be a key issue because women, and I spoke at the Women's March in Washington, D.C. a few days ago, and we had 3 times the number that the march organizers expected. Women are very motivated to make sure that the lives of their daughters and their sisters and their mothers and their aunts are protected. And I might add that we have a saying in the women's movement that a man of quality is not threatened by a woman of equality. So many men will also support us in this battle to win choice and to win, of course, for Kamala Harris, because she represents making sure that women do have a choice and to get the government out of their bodies, off their bodies, and the laws off our bodies. She said she will support signing into law, it's called codification, Roe v. Wade, if the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate also pass the law, she will sign it.
You've made very clear tonight and on many other occasions that a woman's right to choose is not only something you care absolutely passionately about, but is very personal to you. What has been your sort of own personal feelings as you've watched the freedoms that you fought very hard for and you believe in so passionately being unwound by the Supreme Court?
Well, my feeling, of course, is I was shocked and very disturbed that the Supreme Court, after almost 50 years of Roe v. Wade, decided to send it back to the states. That's where we were before Roe v. Wade. Leaving it up to the states should not be left up to the states. And we should trust women. And that's why we keep chanting, we won't go back, we won't go back, we won't go back. Meaning we won't go back prior to Roe v. Wade when it was a crime, because certain states, many states made it a crime, like Texas, like California. And California would come full circle now, but we had to fight to make us a blue state instead of a red state. And so that's the motivating factor for many, many women, especially young women and much older women. I've heard many older women say, this is just so upsetting that we fought so hard to win the right to choose for ourselves and have safe, legal, affordable, available abortions available for our daughters if they need them. And now we've gone in the other direction. And President Trump, of course, is very strong. He's been very proud that he has been able to reverse Roe v. Wade by appointing, or I should say nominating, 3 justices to the United States Supreme Court who were anti-choice. And they are the ones, plus 2 others, that decided to reverse Roe v. Wade. So we have to fight for our rights. I've always said no one has ever given women any rights anywhere, including in the UK. We've always had to fight to win them. And that's why we're waging the fight of our lives now, because our lives and the lives of our daughters depend on it.
Okay, Gloria Allred, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sarah, can I maybe ask you about that? I mean, a very passionate case there made by somebody who's campaigned her whole life, really, for a woman's right to choose. We have had a lot of stories, very credible stories about places, states where you have quite restrictive abortion bans, doctors reluctant to treat people. I mean, are you worried about the way things are moving? And do you think laws are getting too tight in various states?
No, because I think that we keep forgetting to talk about the other equation in this, the humanity involved in this. We're talking about all these legalities, and we're not talking about the other most important factor in this issue, and that is the life of a child and protecting the sanctity of life. We just aren't talking about that very often. And in this presidential campaign, I'm taken aback by this passion that people have, insisting that it is a White House administrative issue, whether an abortion ban or abortion leniency, what will be accepted. This is not a White House administrative issue. It's a state issue as deemed and codified by the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court.
But I'm talking about women bleeding out on an emergency room floor, doctors reluctant to treat them. You do hear these stories. There's no doubt these stories are happening. There's no doubt in some cases they're true. And is that not something that just worries you as a woman, that you're daughter or your
That is an
neighbor's
absolutely
daughter?
terrible, tragic examples that we have heard. Terrible. And no responsible doctor would allow a woman to, of their own volition, allow her to not get the care that she needs. We don't talk about the personalization much of this either. And it is a very personal issue. It's very polarizing also. I was on a panel recently and I was accused of not understanding the issue on a personal level. Somebody was giving an example about what they had gone through and having to make the choice of whether to give life to their baby or to take the life of the baby. And I had to ratchet it down to a personal level for the panel to understand. And that is, I've been through it. I have been through a situation where I was faced with the issue. I was 12 weeks along, pregnant. Nobody even knew that I was pregnant. The doctor and I did. And my baby, my son, was diagnosed in utero with Down syndrome. And 85 to 90% of babies with Down syndrome today are aborted because people are afraid of the challenge. They're not aware of, I think, the possibilities of the wonderful life that not only the child, but the family and others around the child being born with special needs can provide. And this child can put everything in perspective for you in a really healthy way. I'm unapologetically pro-life, always have been. However, when I was told that diagnosis, I knew, wow, what women have to go through in making a decision. What I want to shift the narrative to is trying to make women not be as afraid as I was. I was very afraid of what this challenge would be that I was to face, and I didn't know if I was capable of handling the challenge. And, you know, it just dropped me to my knees, having to ask God to, you know, make my heart ready, make me be able to embrace what this unknown would be with a child born with special needs. And God answered that prayer. My son is perfect. He's the light of my family's life. He's the be-all, end-all. I want an environment in this country that does protect innocent life, understands the sanctity of life, but also empowers women to let them know that they are strong enough and they're capable enough to make the choice of giving life to their baby, if it is too much of a challenge, to give that baby up for adoption so government can aid in those situations too. And once the baby's born, can help out more than we are.
I completely understand. It's an incredibly visceral, personal issue to do, but for you, but as it is for every other woman in America. But didn't you just make the most articulate possible case for a woman's right to choose? Isn't that exactly what you just did? You articulated the terrible choice that you felt you had. You're obviously very, very grateful that you took the decision to keep your son, as you said, who's the light of your life. But, like, didn't you just make the strongest possible case for allowing every woman to make that choice and not the government?
Well, I failed then in making the point that the innocent, defenseless, voiceless child that has the right to life, that should be a factor that we talk more about. That part of the narrative, for some reason, in recent years, has not been part of the package in the selling of this whole, of the abortion issue. It's kind of going away. And that's a scary thing for society, a civilization to be, where pretty soon we forget that this is a human life. It is a child. Every child is created with purpose, even in less than ideal circumstances. So again, for women to be empowered to understand they can continue a career and still give life to their child, continue their education and give life to that child. For them to be empowered to know that a choice does not have to just automatically include snuffing out the life of a child. Perhaps I didn't make that point enough. The point, though, to make on a personal level, that what can seem like life's greatest challenge can turn into life's greatest blessings. We just aren't talking a lot about that, the humanity aspect of this.
You made your argument very clearly. Just on the question of a national abortion ban, some people have suggested that is a plausible outcome of a new Trump presidency, and it looks like Trump is doing good.
How legally, how constitutionally would the top administrator, the executive head of our nation, have a nationwide abortion ban when the highest court of the land has said it's not part of the federal government. This is a state's issue. And the citizens, the residents on a more local level, which is where the issue always should have been, as deemed by SCOTUS, by the Supreme Court, it's where it should be, where the people get to tell their administrators, their executive branch and their legislative branch what the will of the people is. That's where it should be on a state
Because, Sarah,
level.
one of the bonuses for Conservatives if Trump wins is going to be potentially another Supreme Court justice, perhaps making it 7-2 for a Conservative majority. That would kind of, once again, reshape the court, but also raise questions for liberals about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court as an arbiter of American life and society.
Well, you can say that, though, whenever there is a majority represented on the Supreme Court on either side. You know, there have been years where it's been much more of a liberal bent reflected there, and conservatives have been worried about that. That's the nature of, though, our republic, a democracy within a republic, and how our Supreme Court, the nominees are chosen, how the justices are appointed. It's always going to be one way or the other for the most part. And yeah, whichever side doesn't feel like they're represented appropriately.
But we often talk about how the guardrails of America are not there for a second Trump term if he wins. I mean, do you worry that actually there are no constraints now and that the Supreme Court is not there defending, in the Constitution, assuming that, that is how it plays out?
What aspect of the Constitution are they not, or would they not be defending, though? Is it specific to abortion?
No, I'm thinking just generally, does it represent the will of the American people? That's the criticism of the Supreme Court. It no longer represents America. It isn't an arbiter of American life.
It does. When the Supreme Court understands, which they do, we have to have faith that these individuals, justices do, understand that our Constitution, our documents that are liberty documents, that once they realize and adhere to the fact that those are the blueprint for our country to continue to be this great republic, a democracy practiced within a republic.
Okay.
I don't think that we need to worry that Supreme Court justices, there's the balance of power all the time. The Senate, Congress has to approve appointments.
Sarah, I'm just going to come back to this, but we're just going to go to Dan, who is with a senior advisor to the Trump campaign.
Tom, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm joined by Tim Myrtle, senior advisor. Look, the results are beginning to come in. Just give us a snapshot of where you think this race is now.
Well, we feel, I would say, it's kind of an overused phrase, but we feel cautiously optimistic. And I think everything that we have seen tonight is kind of confirming the direction that we thought things are going based on the early vote. I think that Donald Trump is getting the support from the parts of the battleground states where we knew that he needed the support. That support's coming in. And where Kamala Harris was needing to get her support, she's not getting that. For example, in the city of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, we see across Democrat-leaning precincts that they're down about an average of 12%. That means she's going to come out of the city of Philadelphia with a little bit more than 200,000 votes shy of the margin that she needs to come out of that city from. And then if you talk about, like, if you compare it to 2020 and Joe Biden, the early vote, that's the in-person early and the mail-in voting in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden had an edge of 1.1 million in 2020. This time, Kamala Harris has an edge of only about 350,000 or so. So let's say that she's coming out of there. It's a 700,000 vote deficit. Add that to the 200,000 that she's going to be short coming out of Philadelphia. She's 900,000 votes in the hole in Pennsylvania at a state that was razor thin last time and was decided by 80,000 votes. I don't know how she digs out of that hole.
A lot of people want to know, look, this is going to be close. It's looking, as you said, like Donald Trump is pulling out a lead at the moment in some places, but it's early. Is he going to accept the result if it's called against him?
Hold on a second. We're talking about, as the results are coming in, and we're talking about state-by-state issues, state-by-state results that are coming in. You're going to ask me, as we're like an hour and a half into this, whether or not we're going to accept the results. Do you ask any Democrats that question? When was the last time you asked when was the last time you asked a Democrat that question?
Okay, but
Jamie Raskin says
he still says he won the 2020
Jamie Raskin, who is a Democrat member of Congress, says that he may not vote to certify this election if Donald Trump wins. Have you asked any Democrats about that question? Have you asked Hillary Hillary Clinton. She called Donald Trump an illegitimate president after he beat her in 2016. Did you ever ask her or any other Democrat that question? Did you?
He still says he won the 2020 election. That's why I'm asking.
How is Governor Stacey Abrams of Georgia doing? How's she doing? Have you ever asked them any of those questions?
So the answer is
in a
what?
free and fair election, we will accept the results, absolutely.
Is this a free and fair election?
Well, it's still going on, isn't it?
And your gut feeling is?
Our gut feeling is that Donald Trump is winning this race. Anything else you want to talk about the actual results that are coming in?
Okay, and if
you brought me up here to ask about the results of what's coming in, and now you're asking these ridiculous questions. This is how I stood here and waited for you for 20 minutes, and this is the question you're going to ask me?
If he wins North Carolina, which we don't know, it's early, how do you see the path forward? Does that suggest to you that several of the Sun Belt states are going to go his way?
Absolutely it does. I think if North Carolina comes in, it looks like it's very, very close to being called. And I think that Georgia looks like it's in very solid shape. What we're seeing here is that Donald Trump has effected an enormous expansion of the Republican Party. Think about the coalition that he has put together. He has got Arabs, he's got the imams, Muslim imams in Dearborn, Michigan. He's making inroads in the Jewish community. He's probably going to rack up a record level of black support. He's getting double-digit gains into Latino voters. He's obviously going to have conservative Republicans and also mainstream traditional Republicans. At the same time, he's getting probably 2-to-1 over labor union members. Not necessarily the labor union leadership themselves, but the people who work in the union, so much to the point where the Teamsters declined to endorse Kamala Harris. It's the first time in a generation that the Teamsters failed to endorse her. So in Pennsylvania, for example, they went so far in all the states, they released their internal numbers of their membership, and in Pennsylvania, it was 60-30 in favor of Donald Trump. Union members, Teamsters members supporting him. It's an incredible coalition that I don't think that any Democrat or Republican has matched in, 50 years.
Okay, final question. We expect him to be here. Do you know what time he'll be here? Any sense of the mood in Mar-a-Lago?
Oh, the mood is very high. I do know that. I don't know what time he would be coming over here or not.
Appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
I fucking stood here for 20 minutes.
Okay, there we go. We just got to apologise for the language there. I know it's late, particularly late in the UK, but we always have to apologise when there is bad language. Slightly feisty interview. There we go. Not the first and probably not the last, but these things happen. Jessica, you wanted to chip in. We're about to go, I should also say, to see some more polls close, this time in Nevada and Iowa. Iowa, the scene of that famous poll, which may be even more famous when this is all over. Jessica.
Well, we're still, we've only got about 40% of the vote in Pennsylvania, but one key county that is almost fully reported is Lackawanna County. This is Joe Biden's hometown. This is Scranton. Biden carried it by 8 points. Harris is only winning it by about 3.3 points. Okay. So one of the big questions I think a lot of us had when we saw that switch from Biden to Harris was, could Harris hold on to sort of those white working class voters? This shows a lot of erosion there in Pennsylvania, and that's a very ominous sign. Mm-hmm.
Is there any possibility that she would pick it up elsewhere, or really, if she's seen that erosion amongst white working class voters, is there no possibility she could pick it up?
The hope is they can run out margins. So, Philadelphia County, they're only a little over a quarter of the vote in. Pittsburgh has about 2/3 of the vote in. So, we only have 40% of the vote in, but we do, Lackawanna County, almost all of that is in. So that gives us a pretty good indication. This is a key county that I was watching to kind of give me a trend in Pennsylvania.
How is Harris doing in Pittsburgh compared to Biden in 2020?
That I don't have down yet, but yeah.
Okay, well, we're just 20 seconds or so from going to see whether CNN are calling anything as a result of the polls closing in Nevada. Basic reality of where we are at this point in the evening, though, very little sign that this is going well for Harris anywhere, quite honestly, certainly in the Sun Belt, but also, as Jessica was just saying, not looking particularly great up in the Rust Belt either. Let's go to CNN.
In 3 states, including the key battleground of Nevada, a total of 16 electoral votes are on the line right now. And CNN can project that Donald Trump will win the state of Montana. As expected, Trump gets Montana with its 4 electoral votes. CNN can also project that Donald Trump will win the state of Utah. As expected, Utah with its 6 electoral votes. Nevada is too early to call, a battleground state that Donald Trump has narrowly lost in the last 2 elections, but is making a big play for this election. Let's look at the electoral math right now. Donald Trump has 172 electoral votes. Kamala Harris with 81 electoral votes, 270 electoral votes needed to win. Neither of them is there yet. Let's look at the...
Okay, there we are. Too close to call in Nevada, not particularly surprising. Jessica, I just wanted to pick up a little bit more because the night is wearing on and I feel like there is data. Gradually, we are forming a picture, but I don't want to take things further than the data, the underlying data really allows. Can you just
Robert
summarize?
asked about Allegheny County there, which is Pittsburgh, and that's areas where Harris does need to run up. So she actually is running ahead. Again, we only have about 2/3 of the vote in there, but she is getting 62% of the vote, whereas Biden only got 59.7. So a slightly better margins there.
Yeah.
So that is where she could make up grounds where they hope that she can in those counties. We don't have a lot of the Philadelphia counties and suburban counties. That's another place where Democrats really feel like, especially with the issue of abortion there and those Pennsylvania sort of collar counties in and around Philadelphia. So we still have an incomplete picture.
Any insight on Wisconsin and Michigan? Because obviously we talk a lot about Pennsylvania. We often sort of imagine that Wisconsin and Michigan are going to be easier for the Democrats than Pennsylvania. I sometimes wonder why, because it doesn't necessarily seem to 100% track. What's your feeling about those?
I think they're still very close. Let me check the New York Times projection here. They're actually, at this point, have Trump narrowly up in their projected forecast in both Wisconsin and Michigan, but very narrowly. I would note 2 results that are not that might be of interest to the UK viewers. That in Biden's home state of Delaware, actually, Delaware has elected the first transgender person to Congress. Sarah McBride will be the at-large representative there, and Delaware has also elected Lisa Blunt Rochester. She will be the first Black female senator from there. And then Angela also Brooks has also been called the winner in Maryland. So also the first Black woman there. So actually for the first time in history, the U.S. Senate will have 2 Black women in there. There were no Black women until the appointed Senator LaFonza Butler in California. So this is actually, Harris was only the 2nd Black woman elected to the Senate after Carol Moseley Braun in Illinois. So now both Angela also Brooks and Lisa Blunt Rochester are only the 3rd and 4th Black women elected to the Senate.
And is Georgia still going in the wrong direction for Harris and the right direction for Trump, or it's still too early to say, really?
It's so per the New York Times, they have the probability of Trump winning Georgia at 82% currently.
Another really interesting illustration of how divided this country is the popular vote. We don't often talk about that because we focus relentlessly on the Electoral College vote. But actually, the projection now is for the popular vote to be tied. In other words, maybe there's a fraction of 1% towards Harris, but only a fraction. So we could end up with this nation absolutely split down the middle in the popular vote, and that's rare.
Sarah, what do you make of that, the possibility of a straight split? I mean, a literal split down the middle. Does that worry you, that'll just feed further division? I mean, how do you get beyond it as a nation when you're so divided?
It doesn't have to be so, though it doesn't. If we stick with following that blueprint, our Constitution, and we allow more localized government to govern and to accept the will of the people and administer the will of the people and get power out of the federal government, that right there will lessen so much of this division and the polarization of so many issues. We forget that our federal government was not set up to do what it's doing today. It was set up basically to protect individual rights and national security, some taxation, not a whole lot of things. Federal government has sucked up all this power from the states, from our cities, from our boroughs, our counties, but more importantly, from the individual. And if those who are going to be in power in these elected positions would get back to what our government was set up to do, backed by our very brilliant and providential founding fathers, that division can lessen and lessen. Because, yeah, we can't afford to be such a divided country. Division does create a crumbling of our collective, the infrastructure, the psyche of a country.
But
we
Sarah,
have to get it together.
But Sarah, since 2015, since Donald Trump came down the escalator in Trump Towers, we kept on talking about whether he had a pivot in him, whether he could kind of change his tone and tenor. I mean, and yet he continues to be this sort of hyper-partisan, highly antagonistic provocateur in American politics. Could that change if he wins? Can you see a pivot that we've been waiting for 9 years?
Okay.
I say it can if people, again, will, like we talked about earlier, take the personality out of the more important thing, and that is the policy implemented for the country. That's the mature and responsible and professional way of doing business, and I hope we get to that.
OK, we're just joined now by David Miliband, the former Foreign Secretary and CEO of International Rescue Committee. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You talked to us in the last presidential election night programme. Looks like the result might be going in a slightly different direction this time, and therefore I think let us ponder what 4 more years of President Trump will be like. What are your thoughts about what that could or might not mean for the world?
Well, obviously, the election in America is most important for Americans, but because it's the world's superpower, this has outsized importance for the rest of the world. I think it's important to say that there are some immediate issues that will be presented by the commitments that President Trump and the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, have made, if they are to go and win this election tonight and form a government after the 20th of January, most notably over Ukraine, where both of them have set out very strongly divergent positions from the current administration. That's an immediate issue for those of us of European origin, Europe and the UK. I think it's also important to say that there are different trends, different camps within the Republican coalition, some of whom emphasize a more isolationist posture, others of whom are very focused on China, still others who seek to preserve the primacy of the US. Obviously, we don't know who the government's going to be, who the key personnel are going to be. We don't yet know who's won the election. But certainly, I think you can expect a significant change on issues like Ukraine. It's not clear whether there'll be significant change on what is the central geopolitical issue in the United States, which is its relationship with China.
David, look, we could spend some time talking about the possibility of President Harris, but A, right now, it looks marginally less likely, and B, you know, I think in a lot of areas it might be a somewhat a continuation of what we've seen from this White House administration that, apart from anything else, Kamala Harris was a part of. But like you know as well as I do, there are some, and we've been talking about them earlier in this evening, there are some very, very, very big issues that are going to face the leader of the free world pretty soon. Potentially Iran having a deployable nuclear weapon, the possibility of China deciding to make a move on Taiwan. You know, you've sat in the chair of Foreign Secretary, you've pondered what the leader of the free world might do. I mean, do you agree those are the big challenges? What other challenges would you pick out? And how do you think somebody like Donald Trump, who, you know, love him or hate him, he's a maverick, how do you think he responds to those big issues?
Well, I think that the short-term challenges are in the main twofold. One is in Ukraine, and second is in the Middle East. You mentioned the Iran issue, but I think that the danger of a wider conflagration beyond Gaza, beyond Lebanon, is very real. Now, those issues are connected to the wider geopolitical situation. America is still 25% of global GDP, global income. And the question is, how does it sustain its throw weight, its political throw weight internationally? That immediately takes you into questions of alliances. A very significant development in the Biden administration has been the relationship between the US, Japan, Australia and India, the so-called Quad. Some people refer to it as a second alliance alongside NATO that puts the US in a very strong position. I think the big question for a Trump administration resolves down to two things. To what extent does it want to isolate itself? And to what extent does it want to act unilaterally rather than multilaterally? Those are questions in which there are different views within the advisory camp for President Trump. There are different views that he and his vice president have enunciated over the last 3 or 4 months. And so I think there are big questions that will be filled in by any appointments they make between now and January the 20th, because one of the blessings of the US system, unlike ours, is that the government takes 2.5 months to form itself. And we'll see in the space of time, if indeed they win the election, who fills the key roles and where they fit into the three camps that I described earlier, which do seem to have quite divergent views of America's role in the world and how it wants to engage with the wider world.
With the best of all possible worlds, it's quite hard to imagine Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, if Donald Trump is the president, really getting along or seeing eye to eye on many issues. And we've of course had this, you might say it's a storm in a teacup, or I mean, others might disagree about Labour officials coming to campaign in the election. You know, I think if you've covered politics for a long time, you know that's nothing unusual, but clearly the Trump camp did take a bit of offence. I mean, would you be worried about the state of UK-US relations under a Trump White House?
I think the fact that Keir Starmer came to the US for the UN General Assembly and made a point of having dinner with President Trump shows excellent diplomacy, both on his part and on the part of the diplomats. The current Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, was at the dinner as well. I think that the relationship between the UK and the US has two key elements. One set of elements sustain over time, and those are embodied in the intelligence relationship, but in other foreign policy relationships. The second element is obviously the way in which the UK is able to bring something to the table. And if nothing else, President Trump has shown himself to be highly responsive to what others are willing to do as part of a partnership. He set himself against partnerships that he believes do not deliver a balanced deal for America. And if Britain turns up at the table with something to offer, I think we'll get a responsible hearing.
David, good to speak to you as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, let's go to Rohit in Georgia. Rohit, you've had a busy evening there. North Carolina looks like it's going Trump. What's your view on Georgia?
Hasn't tweeted anymore.
OK, Rohit, not able to hear me or not answering. Perhaps I should ask a different question, but no, I think he couldn't hear me. So where are we at this point in the evening? There's a lot flying around. Let's try and recap on who wants to pick. Adam, where do you think we are?
Just a couple of things I was thinking as we came on the 10 o'clock hour, thinking where we started the night. I mean, when we started, I said some of the counties in North Carolina, Charlotte, Raleigh, would be key to watch to see where the Democrats have. And the map has looked like it's trending not necessarily in our way. I just heard a report that there's only about 12% of the vote out in Charlotte because they're having trouble uploading the ballots there. And there are hundreds of thousands of votes still to be counted in Charlotte, an area that Democrats should win about 60-40. So we'll see if that number comes in and what that changes.
Okay.
The other thing I think is like we may end up back where we were at the beginning of the ballgame, where Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan are what ultimately decides the race. The Harris campaign has been clear; they do not need North Carolina, they do not need Georgia to win the election, but it would be certainly nice to have. So we'll see where that may mean though we're in for a longer night as we get more votes that could come in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
Do you think Arizona's a lost cause?
It's way too. I mean, I haven't confessed I have not seen the numbers yet. I thought it was interesting that they called the Senate race for Ruben Gallego pretty quickly. Now, like Kerry Lake is a disastrous candidate and like it has no business serving in the Senate. So who knows?
Local TV anchor Meghan McCain was talking about her earlier. She's about as far from a McCain Republican as I think it's possible to get.
One of the biggest election deniers that we saw in 2020. So again, we'll see how that unfolds. I think the last thing I'll say is we've talked a lot about exit polls tonight and what to make of them. The NBC exit poll had Harris and Trump equal on the black vote as compared to 4 years ago. That there was no move among black voters between Biden and Trump and Harris and Trump this time around. Again, it's one exit poll. Who knows where we are, but that's one thing that jumped out to me.
I'd like to highlight something Adam and I were talking about in the corner while you were interviewing Governor Palin, and that is the third-party vote. And we haven't touched on that yet tonight, but that could be pulling away some support from Harris as well. I think as we heard from those young people in California and San Francisco, obviously a very left part of the country, but they were so upset with Harris over support for Israel over Gaza that either they went for a third party or I think one of them reluctantly voted for Harris. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a trend. We don't have any, real hard data on that yet, but that's one of the things I want to watch tonight, the impact of these third parties.
Which of the blue wall states would you kind of think are most confident in winning, if you can win any of them?
If any of them,
Yeah.
I think Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's the best bet. I'm from that part of the country, so I know the people there very well. I was there with President Trump when he won it in 2016. He just has an energy about him that really resonates with a lot of Midwestern people, and especially in more rural parts of the Midwest. Let's remember he went up to Green Bay Packers, the very famous American football team, where he was endorsed by NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre. That was really important. He put on the vest of the garbage truck driver, and people got a real kick out of that. So his whole shtick goes very well with a regular Midwesterner who likes to hear sort of just the facts.
Okay, let's go and have an update from Anushka on Arizona and what the Latino voters might be doing there and possibly in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to show you a few things. I showed you some of our data from AP Votecast earlier. Here's a tweet from an NBC political reporter about their own data on Latino voters, which is talking about double-digit increases for Trump, which is quite a big deal. Still Harris ahead, but this echoes the sort of thing that we saw in that national data from AP as well. And you mentioned Arizona. We've had a look specifically at the Latino vote in Arizona on our AP Votecast survey, which, remember, is a very big survey carried out in 2020 and 2024, but it is not actual results. And what you can see here is that while Biden was on 59% with this voting group, that has squeezed for Harris. And that could be quite significant, and a small uplift there for Donald Trump. One of the things that was really interesting about Arizona, and if we just pull it up on the map, I can talk about it, is the fact that a third of voters inside Arizona are Latino voters. And historically, they have tended to go fairly strongly for Democrats, not as strongly as black voters. And when Arizona went blue in 2020, people were saying, is this a long-term trend? Has there been so much demographic change that this is going to continue? Earlier I showed you 60% of the population in Arizona actually lives in one county called Maricopa County, which is where the city of Phoenix is. And there has been huge demographic change. So if it were to go back to being red tonight, that would be, lead people to really question whether that was a trend or not, and what has happened with these Latino voters. And you've mentioned North Carolina. I just want to highlight it for 1 minute just to say CNN has, of course, not called it yet, so it is not called on our map, but the Decision Desk, another media group, have called that for the Republicans. We'll keep an eye on all the other broadcasters. And so, of course, the exact thing you're talking about is now the thing that we are wondering about, which is whether it could come down very much to that Rust Belt, to Wisconsin, to Michigan and to Pennsylvania, where things are looking more mixed, perhaps, but, more positive in some ways. I did mention earlier in Pennsylvania that, according to our survey data, non-college educated white women had seen improvements for Harris compared to Biden. If we just pull up in Pennsylvania the state of the race as we have it right now, as the voting is going in, you can see that 47% of votes have been counted. And Donald Trump on that does look like he's got a slim lead, 50% to Kamala Harris's 48%. And here I come with my regular caveat. In 2020, there was a situation where, as Pennsylvania was being counted, first it swung overly towards Democrats, then it swung overly back towards Republicans, before in the end Joe Biden won the state. In fact, it was the reason that Donald Trump claimed some voter fraud at the time, because he had been ahead. And part of the reason for that was because there were more Republicans who were voting on the day. And I just finally want to bring up the county map of Pennsylvania. Now, this is coloured in the colours that it was in 2020, but it can show you some of the things that Jessica was talking about earlier. In particular, Joe Biden was born in Scranton in the northeast of Pennsylvania. And, in that very county that, Scranton is in, she is ahead. but not by as much as Joe Biden was then. She's ahead 3 points instead of 8 points. And that means that the other city areas that you can see here, I've pointed this out before, it looks very red. That's because those are rural areas. What's really, really key in Pennsylvania is what's been happening around Pittsburgh, but also what's been happening here around Philadelphia. One of the things that Joe Biden did is he really drove up that urban vote. And obviously that looks like bad news further north, but the Democrats will still be hopeful. And some of our AP survey data does look a little bit better for them here than it does in the Sun Belt.
OK, Anushka, thank you very much indeed. Jessica, I'm just about to go and talk to Rachel in Pennsylvania, but you want to chip in, which is great.
I mean, what we're seeing with the younger vote, and especially younger men, which is sort of this bro vote that Trump has been going for, Trump is actually winning by 10 points, 18 to 29-year-old men. And while Biden carried 18 to 29-year-olds 61 to 36, Harris is only winning those 52 to 44. So it's those younger voters. You know, there was a concern about with what's going on in Gaza that those voters may not have come out for Harris. We certainly saw them dipping off of Biden and things. But, you know, we've been talking earlier, you know, as we talked about that Iowa poll and everything with white women, we wondered whether sort of Trump doubling down on this younger men might have played out. It might have been the good gambit to make.
Joe Rogan was the decider. Well, there you go. You couldn't have a more 2024 potential turn of events than that, I guess. Now, let's go to Rachel in Pennsylvania. Rachel, what is the data telling you about how things are going there?
Well, it was really interesting just listening to both Jessica and Anushka talk about this crucial area, Allegheny County. That's where we are here. And it is so critical because along with Philadelphia, because it contains Pittsburgh, the Steel City, it is one of the most populous in the entire state. It is absolutely critical, and it's pretty tense here at the moment for a couple of reasons. First, the Democratic campaign headquarters is behind us here. We understand that after a number of what were called threatening phone calls were made, they were advised to wrap things up and go home, which they have done. But it was tense too, because just as that was happening, they were crunching through some of the data around postal votes. And that's what's already come in this county. It invested in 2 very high-speed processing machines because, as you may well remember, in this state, they can't begin counting those mail-in ballots until the polls open. So they were only able to do that at 7 o'clock this morning. The good news is they've made real progress, and they've managed to get through over 80% of the 220,000 mail-in ballots that have come in from Allegheny County here. Now, if turnout is the same as 4 years ago, that could be as much as a third of the vote. And the numbers are at the moment 72% Harris, 26% Trump. Now, look, you really have to say that this is a small percentage of the overall vote in Allegheny County, an even smaller one, of course, in the state as a whole. But speaking to local Democrats here, it has given them cause for some optimism. And that's because although Harris is actually behind where Biden was on these postal votes at this time 4 years ago, and remember, they're not all in, we've only got just over 80% of them. Although she seems to be behind him, there has, of course, been a change in the people who are using those mail-in ballots. You'll remember that last time around, Trump didn't like them at all. This time, he's been encouraging Republicans to get their votes in early. So they've seen an 11% rise in Republicans choosing to vote by post in this county. And so that makes things even closer. Now, one other thing that's given them a reason for optimism, for the Democrats at least, is they say that overall they had 146,000 registered Democrat votes coming back as part of those mail-in ballots. Well, they got 160,000 votes for Harris. That is 14,000 more votes from her coming in from independents. They believe that is a sign for optimism. So many caveats here. They think it's healthy enough for Harris to be able to take this really important county in this absolutely critical state. They're also clear that they would have liked it to have been at this point by a higher margin. So I think the one thing we can say with absolute certainty is if there were 80,000 votes in it across Pennsylvania last time, it is even more nail-bitingly close here now.
As if that's what the world needed, Rachel. Thank you very much. Yeah, one thing we're not going to get is clarity. Now, or maybe we are. Brian Brokaw, former campaign manager for Kamala Harris, joins me to try and shed some light on this. Brian, thank you very much for joining us. How do you read it at this point in the night?
It's early, and if there's one thing people who have worked for Kamala Harris know, it's that don't get too excited and don't get too down in election night. And in 2010, her opponent declared victory, and many of the media followed suit, and ultimately she won, and she's gone on to much bigger and better things since then. So I think, look, go figure. The race is coming down to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, it looks like. And this is exactly what we have known for some time was likely to be the case. And Donald Trump knew that, Kamala Harris knew that. And this is going to be a long night here and a long day for you, but this is what we expected.
Which of those states are you more confident about, and which would you be most worried about?
Well, look, I mean, it's our nature and our job to be worried about everything. Of course, as some of your other panelists and reporters have noted, in certain key precincts, she is ahead of where President Biden was in 2020. In others, she's behind. And so, of course, I'm looking at some of those areas where she is trailing behind where President Biden is. However, it's important to remember that the last week of this campaign, the momentum really shifted her way. I think she did not have a great couple of weeks in the middle of October, but things really seemed to shift over the last few weeks, over the last 7 to 10 days. And those votes, many of those votes have yet to be counted. A lot of those votes are Election Day voters. So don't be surprised if a lot of these margins begin to tighten up over the course of the night and, dare I say, into the next coming days, because that is, of course, the nature of our elections.
Do you sort of accept that things are looking a bit less promising down in the Sun Belt? Do you feel like where we are, North Carolina, Georgia, maybe even Arizona, a bit more of a stretch, really? I mean, yes, it definitely looks tight in the 3 northern swing states. Possible reasons to think it's a bit less tight down south? Do you accept that that might be true, or do you think there's everything to play for there too?
Look, I think at this point, we have to let the vote counts proceed. And again, as I was just saying, I think that the vote over the last 7 to 10 days is really going to favor her. Now, the real question is whether too much damage was done by people voting for Donald Trump over the previous weeks of early voting. I don't think at this point there's any reason to write off any of those states. We saw what happened in 2020. 2020 in Georgia was a different scenario because you had Senate races as well, 2 different Senate races that brought out a lot of Democratic votes. But just the fact that Georgia is a competitive state, that North Carolina is a competitive state, is a big change from where things have been historically. And so I don't think there's any reason at all to give up hope on those states. And again, there's no reason to. At this point, we just need to let the vote counts proceed. We know that Donald Trump likes to stop the vote when it looks like he's ahead, but that's not how democracy works. Every vote will be counted. And in some places, some parts of the country, including California, the polls are still open. So the night is still very young out here, especially in the West Coast. But this election will probably not be decided tonight or even tomorrow. It could take several days, if not longer.
OK, Mr. Brokaw, thank you very much indeed. That may indeed be the case. We may be sitting here on Saturday, like we were last time, waiting for Pennsylvania to declare. But it has to be said, we might well not be. The New York Times is now, I'm told, making it 82% likely that Donald Trump is going to be the next president and walk into the White House. Jessica, I feel I should come to you for explanation of this.
Yeah, I mean, again, the trend line that we are seeing, and even conversing with some of my colleagues here, I think is clearly in Trump's favor. Things can change. We still don't have all of the results in. But the New York Times is also even projecting that Trump is on pace to win the popular vote by less than a point. Remember, even when he won in 2016, he did not win the popular vote. So this would be significant. And because of the way the Electoral College votes are allocated, they lean more toward Republicans already. So the fact that we are even seeing that shows that there's an even greater margin in the Electoral College for Republicans right now.
I mean, this feels like the New York Times has got it wrong before, but I feel like the last hour or two has been trending in a certain direction. People are beginning to make calls. Anyone want to chip in on how reliable they think the New York Times' decision-making is at this point in the evening?
Well, I'm having flashbacks a little bit to 2020, where Democrats were Democrats were looking at the needle and having a freak out, and then
at this point,
and then it came. So I'm a little bit cautious of living and dying by the New York Times needle. Look, I think it's still relatively early, and again, I think we want to see what happens in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That is still, I think, where Democrats know, like, if we can hold those 3 states, Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States. And so, no doubt that this is a close election. I think a lot of Democrats have the hope that we could get off to some barnstorming win and banish Trump to the ashes of history. And that's not where we are. We're in a divided country. This was a margin of error race going into Election Day, and that's where we may end up being.
But I just want to emphasize, I mean, whatever the outcome tonight, there are so many people on the left in America saying, how can it be even this close? That is a very kind of visceral, strong reaction amongst all of my sort of Democratic friends who are just in a state of shock. Not that they've lost tonight, because we don't know that until the blue wall is called, but just shocked that it's this close. And I think that is I mean, presumably your friends, your community is feeling that?
Sure. I mean, Democrats are notorious for being very nervous about everything, about the weather, about, but look, I think that there is no question that we live in a very divided country, and there are people on the left who never see any news about anything on the Republican side, and vice versa.
Is there truth in the suggestion that Harris was weaker precisely because she had never had a nominating contest, that she didn't win a primaries? Would she have been stronger if, A, she had more confrontational interviews earlier in the process, and secondly, if she'd actually kind of won the primary for the nomination rather than having a coronation in Chicago at the DNC?
I think it's just simply that the majority of people believe the country is on the wrong track. We saw that uptick, a 10-point swing from 2020 to 2024 of more people thinking the country is on the wrong track. And history tells us that the incumbent party, regardless of who the nominee is, does not win in that instance.
Okay, I want to come back to what